Hey guys, welcome back to the Gear.Locker. And today, we're going to be taking a look at the HK G36x Airsoft replica made by Elite Force, Umarex, Ares, who knows at this point. In the box, you're going to get a couple of items. First, you'd get a manual, but we'll get into why I don't have one in a bit. You're also going to see a high-capacity magazine. This is full polymer construction, and not half bad, but it's a high cap. You're also going to get the G36x replica. Now, as I mentioned, I did not get a manual because this in fact is not a brand new AEG. Instead, this one was purchased from a website called AirsoftMarketplace.com. They typically get a lot of used or refurbished items, and this one was exactly that. It was a return from a company and they said, hey, the blowback doesn't work, there's some rattling inside, what could be the problem? Well, because I've worked on G36s for so many years, I was able to tell exactly what it was. So I removed that blowback unit and now have a fully stock but blowback disabled AEG G36. So let's jump right into it. The body is full polymer, including the stock and top rail, but that front rail is aluminum. It's got a fairly decent weight, but being a G36C, that's kind of expected because it's pretty small. It has a very futuristic look with that IDZ furniture that was introduced back in 2015. This model did come out just around the 2020 time period, so it's got all that cool stuff in a very refined fashion, including the H-key front rail, which has specific H-key rail segments, although the Picatinny on top and bottom is standard. It does have a very nice monolithic upper rail, with very crisp and firm front and rear sights that fold down. The charging handle is solid and will reveal your hop-up. Your ambidextrous selector switch offers 4 different options: safe, semi, 2-round burst, and full auto, which is really cool. The stock is also really nice because it not only extends to multiple positions, but it also folds. Not to mention a really nice cheek riser as well. While this one does come with a high cap, it also accepts a myriad of different kinds of magazines. As you can hear, that stock one clicks in pretty positively. That classic G-Mag locks in very well and feeds perfectly. The old style Mag brand mid caps work surprisingly. Those things are really old, but they're classics. The modern Elite Force ones click and rock in beautifully. And the only one that I had an issue with that didn't lock in positively was one from JG. It was a standard high cap that came stock with a replica. It still worked with some wiggling, but not the best. Adjusting the hop-up was very easy because of this cool feature. When you pull back the charging handle, next to the trigger you'll see a little bolt lock button. Press that, it locks the bolt back, and you can adjust your hop-up up or down. All you have to do is pull that charging handle again, and it'll slam back forward. One of the most common complaints on this replica is battery space, and while that typically goes for any G36, this one is particularly rough. Once you remove this front screw with either an Allen key or a flathead, you can pull off your H-key rail. This will reveal your hop-up compartment. But I'd like to comment, this is a really, really nice aluminum replica. It rivals that of the Ultimate Industries replica that you can buy for over $100 online. So even though this is a C-length, it is very well built and very sturdy. But back to that battery space. Look at that. That's all you get. Not only is it still using a small Tamiya connector, which, come on, switch to Dean's, but you don't get a lot of room at all, even with that wiring there. 2 options that I have found range a couple different LiPos. One of which is a small 7.4 volt. This one you're absolutely going to have the easiest time working with, as it can kind of just slot right in there. It does press against that bottom of that rail, but it works. If you do want to run an 11.1, which I would recommend, you're going to need a butterfly type like this. It does take those 3 cells and split them up, and you have a lot more wiring crap to mess with, but you can get it in there with some work. I would recommend a 1000 milliamp option, because as you can see with my 1200 milliamp, I'm having a hard time, and I haven't even been able to swap that connector over. Now that I've got this part off, let me show you how to disassemble this. It's very simple, and all you really need after that front handguard are these 2 pins right here. And even then, you don't even need to take the front off. But I'll be honest, it is very hard to do, so you're probably going to need some kind of tools for this. Don't be a mongoloid like me and use the back of a screwdriver, be a little gentler with it. Once you've got those 2 pins out, you're going to want to store them somewhere. Keep them very, very safe, but a really cool thing about the G36, especially this IDZ stock, is you can actually tuck it in the little pinholes in the rear of it. First, engage that magazine release, and then rotate out that magwell. It's a plastic magwell, but it does the job just fine. To get the lower gearbox out, sometimes you can wiggle it out. However, in all cases, I would recommend folding the stock, removing that pin as well as spring, and then lowering the gearbox out of the upper receiver. Now let's remove the hop-up assembly. You're going to need to access that ejection port. Take the hop-up, with preferably 2 fingers, and rotate it so that the bottom of the hop-up faces upwards towards the ejection port. Then, you should be able to just fold the stock and take your barrel assembly and hop-up assembly right out of the receiver. This is a standard polymer G36 hop-up, which it's okay. It is a rotary style, so it'll function fairly decently, but again, it's nothing to write home about, and I would recommend finding a nice aluminum or metal replacement soon. Back to the gearbox, this one is a proprietary V3 style. You can actually fit a standard V3 gearbox in this replica, but Ares decided to do things a little bit differently, as they tend to do. As you can see on the right side, not only do we have that MOSFET system kind of exposed, but we have full access to all the other controls. This is where that electric blowback unit would ride. It would ride on the piston, which does put additional wear and tear, and as you can see, it would kind of just slide along here and pull that bolt back before shooting forward. This replica does have a quick change spring system, which is actually accessible without even having to take down the replica this far, but it is very easily accessible once you do this. How do we adjust our motor height though? You're going to have 3 screws down here that you're going to need to remove. All 3 of these use the Phillips head. Now, all you have to do is pop off that motor plate. Might take some work, but once it comes out once, it should be a little easier from then on. And here, you not only see our motor connections, but the motor height adjustment, which uses a flathead screwdriver. Going one step further, you're going to need to remove a small pin here. This could be as easy as 1 whack, or it might be a little more stiff. I've had differing experiences. Take this pin out, set it to the side, and then you should be able to mostly remove your gearbox. I would recommend setting this to the semi or 2-round burst setting and wiggling it until it pops out like this. And here you have your gearbox. We can see 2 bushings and 1 bearing on the outside, but really that's kind of it. This motor didn't impress me, as it's a ferrous magnet and not a neomagnet. But that MOSFET brings the snappiness and that trigger response. So now let's put this all back together. Simply reverse the process. Slide that gearbox back into the lower receiver and make sure that bolt lock and trigger are out of the way. Slide that pin back in and the gearbox is back in the lower receiver. After you function check, let's put in that hop-up assembly. Make sure that spring is back on, and then you're going to slide it into the replica. You're going to first want it to face outwards towards you, where the BBs would fall into the hop-up chamber. Push it forwards to compress the spring, and rotate that hop-up assembly clockwise. Once you've got that, it should sit normally in the receiver. Then, you're going to take your gearbox, slide that wire right through the front, and reinsert the lower receiver and gearbox assembly into the replica. Ensure that the wires don't get pinched like I did here, and slide the wire off to the side of the hop-up assembly. From here, close that stock and slide in your bolt. Take your spring and guide rod backplate assembly and slide that into the receiver as well. You might need to hold this in before you reinsert the pins. Putting them in might take a little bit of work, so use a tool if you have to, but again, don't go ham. you might have some difficulty rocking that magwell back in. Ensure that it is clicked in all the way in place, and then from there, it should rock in pretty smoothly. Reinsert that pin, and you're done. Oh yeah, and don't forget to put that motor plate back on. That's pretty important. So let's test out some batteries. Here's that 7.4 I was talking about. And now, that 11.1 volts. This is where it's at. If I had to choose between these two, it's pretty clearly that 11.1. Should you get this replica though? Let me explain my gripes first, and then I'll give you my answer. First, we have this very bright red and white G36x logo that's not realistic. Not to mention, these warning labels and all that don't look good. I'm also not a fan of the cheap construction of some parts, so we'll see how that holds up. But for the future, I'm going to turn this G36x, which is based on the G36C, into a full-length KA4 with Ultimate Industries parts, real parts, and whatnot. So if you'd like to see that video, let me know in the comments below. Although in short, I would definitely recommend this replica. Whether you're new or looking to build out a Spetsker loadout, this G36 can be an awesome base for many future builds. So with that, thank you guys so much for checking out this video. This is the Gear.Locker. Get some cool AEGs, and we'll see you in the next one. Speed soft.